Over the past 2 years, I've had a lukewarm relationship with Gege Akutami's Jujutsu Kaisen. It would be hyperbolic to say I disliked it, I just didn't like it as much as everyone else. I haven't been its biggest fan, but I don't necessarily want that to be the case. Much like Demon Slayer before it and Chainsaw Man after it, Jujutsu Kaisen is massively popular, and it's awesome to see newer shonen get worldwide attention. These titles are the representation of anime and manga to a casual and mainstream audience, so of course I'm happy to see Jujutsu Kaisen get an overwhelmingly positive reception. But that doesn't change the fact I was struggling to click with it personally. I can confidently say this isn't a simple matter of it not being for me, because on paper, Jujutsu Kaisen is a perfect fit for me. From the very beginning, I've liked its style, personalities, genres, concepts, and even some of its characters. I could tell you more things I liked than things I disliked, so why was I struggling to click with it? Maybe it's the experience I had with it. Maybe I was comparing it too much to other series. Maybe it was me. My friends, girlfriend, and comments seemed to love it in such a way that made me wonder if I missed something. I'm not scared to be wrong about a series or to have my opinions change. I think it's good to continuously keep an open mind to new perspectives. I admittedly have a lot of confidence in my opinions, so it can be hard to maintain the mentality required to constantly reevaluate what I think and why I think it, but that's what I'm here to do. I want to like Jujutsu Kaisen, and now, after reading the 17 volumes released in English, I believe it's finally begun to click with me. To probably no one's surprise, the tide began to turn around the Gojo's past and Shibuya incident arcs. Somewhere along that line, Jujutsu Kaisen proved its worth and finally began to sink its teeth into me. Since then, I've been warming up to the whole of the series. I want to lay everything out on the table to consider all my critical thoughts and feelings I've developed towards Jujutsu Kaisen and appraise how those opinions have or haven't changed over the past 2 years. This discussion will not be detailed in analytical reasoning, rather this is only meant to serve as an exercise in comparing previous and current thoughts. If there's ever a day for analyzing Jujutsu Kaisen's finer details, today is not that day. As I discuss my opinions, please do keep in mind this is all still a process for me. Only recently have I been trying to understand why I like it more than I did mere months ago, and I still have only experienced the series once per version. I am certain I have not remembered everything correctly, either because I didn't care to retain it at the time, or I simply have misremembered due to low exposure. Give me a little slack if I'm wrong about anything or my opinions seem undercooked. I will continue to reflect upon Jujutsu Kaisen, and as I do, I'm sure my opinions will fully form over the coming months. This video is just an early step in that process. At the forefront of my former criticisms, I thought the main characters were a tad mediocre, albeit somewhat likable and cool. I thought Itadori was pretty cute, but bland. Nobara was alright, maybe a little unlikable. Megumi was totally forgettable, and Gojo was kinda cool, but not my favorite mentor type. They failed to catch my eye. It was an inoffensive impression, but it certainly prevented me from getting invested. I knew from the beginning that if I were to find myself endeared to at least a couple of the main characters, I would grow to like Jujutsu Kaisen more. I also knew that was within reason because I did like the supporting cast a fair bit. Todo, Panda, Maki, Inumaki, and so on. This proved to me that Jujutsu Kaisen's cast was capable of captivating me. All I needed were some reasons to start caring about them. Let's start with the most neutral and marginal change of opinion, Nobara. It's difficult for me to pin down my feelings on her character, both past and present. I never gave it much consideration, and now being where I am, I feel as if I somewhat overlooked her. I did like her combat style, which is pretty unique, but nothing about her as a personality had stuck with me in a meaningful way. Even now, I find myself more drawn to Maki if we're talking about the female characters. Still, this could be a matter of me needing to see her story from the perspective of someone who is a fan of Jujutsu Kaisen. Perhaps on repeated readings, I would find myself more attuned. As it stands, I've at least learned to appreciate what she brings to the table. I like that she has attitude, confidence, strength, and purpose within the story. I also like that nothing alludes to her being forced into the role of a romantic interest, a trend that used to be a little more commonplace, and instead can be treated as just another person on the battlefield. In fact, all the ladies are fairly independent of the boys and can put up a good fight on their own merits. I quite enjoy what a handful of modern battle shonen are doing with the representation of women. By giving female characters personal agency and enough strength to adequately fight, it feels as if we're moving towards a time where being a girl in a battle shonen does not equate to only being a damsel in distress or the weakest of the pack, and that can only be a good thing. Nobara is treated with respect. She is a strong female and not in a pandering way that undermines her strength. Nobara is no Samus Aran yet, but this is a step in the right direction for female manga characters. Nobara might not be my favorite, male or female, but at least it's not because she's limited by her gender.
Okay.
Megumi is also difficult for me to grasp because I didn't just overlook him, I flat out ignored him. My gut reaction is that there's nothing special about Megumi, but since reading further into the manga, I've had nothing but a nagging sensation that, in my own dispassionate feelings while reading the first handful of arcs, I read right past what makes him interesting. I didn't think his character was the most sticky at first glance. I didn't have any attachment to him, and I still don't have much attachment, but I've been wondering how much that's my fault for not paying attention to his story. I like some stoic characters, so I don't think that's a problem, but with stoic characters, their appeal is usually stored away in their stories and subtle progressions. If Megumi was unappealing to me, it might be because I didn't give myself much of a chance to warm up to his story until it was already coming to a head. By the time I noticed this was the case, I was caught off guard by how intertwined he is with the rest of the characters in the overarching story. It's almost as if I paid no mind to him being a major component of the manga, and once it caught up to me, I was lost as to who Megumi even was. I'm unsure of how much I should be blamed for it, but I failed to follow Megumi's story, and I don't believe Jujutsu Kaisen should take the brunt of my mistake. It's not as if I missed his ample amounts of charisma, because he just doesn't have that, but I know he has more influence within the story and world than I admittedly paid attention to. I certainly skimmed more than I should have. I don't assume I will ever suddenly fall in love with him, but if any character is going to benefit from a second reading, it will undoubtedly be Megumi.
Cool.
I've never had strong criticisms of Gojo, but as with the others, I struggled to connect with him. I didn't really have a sense for where his story was heading or who he even was. I felt he was decent, but clearly a Kakashi clone, right? Since then, I've realized that Gojo is a genuinely cool character, and honestly, beyond taking a mentor role and a few key character design traits, he doesn't have a whole lot in common with Kakashi. Gojo's personality couldn't be any further away from Kakashi's, with their similarities going only as far in as being mentors to the protagonist and the cool guy with white hair. Otherwise, Gojo's characterization, an aggressive and anti-authority figure, doesn't quite harken back to the relaxed, chilled-out nature of Kakashi. Maybe some amount of inspiration is present, but it's disingenuous to suggest he is nothing but a Kakashi clone. The more I sit on it, I quite like Gojo's personality. It gives him an edge that cuts like a knife, and his role as a mentor figure has some pretty neat twists. His motivations are filled with a contempt towards the status quo, a near political unrest that forges an engaging character-driven story. Currently, I'm looking forward to seeing Gojo's fate more than any other, and I have become noticeably more invested within recent arcs. I never expected to think Gojo was this cool, but man, he is cool.
Sweet.
From chapter 1, it was apparent to me that Itadori is a protagonist that defines the general ideologies and morality of the average shonen protagonist. but it doesn't end there. What I had yet to realize was that his circumstances attempt to bend and break him more than just about any other shonen hero. In a sense, he is a standard protagonist who faces harsh, grim realities, sometimes failing to overcome those hurdles and suffering the consequences of simply trying his best. His ideals are attacked by a world that does not allow bodiless battles, with foes that disfigure the value of life itself, and he often finds himself as the center of emotional devastation. He is the protagonist of a story that constantly rejects him as a hero. He is never allowed to save every person who needs saving, yet he is asked to continue moving forward. And that is an exceptionally fresh direction to take his character. This starts to become apparent in the Versus Mahito arc, but as I've mentioned before, Shibuya Incident is when I started to take note of my expectations being challenged ever so slightly. I began to kind of love Itadori, who no longer has the optimistic gaze of a standard protagonist, but a character that has been dragged through the ringer while clinging on to the last bit of hope that he can maintain his ideals in this brutal world. If Gojo is a turnaround, then Itadori is a whiplash, because I never expected to think of him as anything more than a standard protagonist, but here we are. If I did still have any qualms with Itadori, it would be that his introduction into the story is underwhelming, and it takes multiple arcs for me to start caring about his character. If given better focus, I could imagine it wouldn't have taken me so long to appreciate what has been done with his character. His friends are beyond irrelevant, no harm no foul, but I do wish the time spent with them could be allocated to his grandfather instead, the character who actually has any meaningful impact. While they're given a significant amount of page space in chapter 1, the relationship with his grandfather is as minimal as it can be for establishing his core beliefs that will be ever present in the themes going forward. Their single interaction can mostly be boiled down to his grandfather saying, "Save a lot of people," and then dying. It doesn't expand on who either character is, the impact his grandfather has had on his life, or why I should care about their relationship. His grandfather acts as a glorified parcel to deliver the ideals that Itadori will try to hold on to throughout the story, and I think it could use more focus, if only because it's so important in laying the groundwork for Itadori and the themes of Jujutsu Kaisen. These core fundamentals of Itadori are expanded upon later, but their establishment is on shaky ground. I wish I could say my opinion has shifted here, but it really hasn't. I like the idea, the sentiment behind it, but it still feels like the bare minimum to get his character arc rolling. Not to rely too heavily on comparisons, but the 5th part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Golden Wind, is a great example of what I like to see in establishing a character's motivations, ideals, who they are, and why they are that person. The backstory of Giorno Giovanna greatly helps construct him as a character, and it plants a message that receives incredible payoff by the end of the manga. Itadori, and by extension Jujutsu Kaisen, do not emphasize the importance of introduction nearly as much as Golden Wind, or to the extent I wish it did, but at the end of the day, I'm not too caught up on this criticism. I appreciate what the story has been able to do with what is in essence a page worth of dialogue from his grandfather. Still, I thought this criticism was worth mentioning because it's one of the few that hasn't been totally uprooted yet. I would like to see other perspectives, and maybe there's still more to Itadori's introduction that I've yet to consider. Maybe it doesn't matter that much to begin with, and this will eventually become a minor nitpick. After all, it's more important to judge how a story further elaborates on a character, and Jujutsu Kaisen has been doing a swell job with Itadori in that department.
Oh yeah.
By and large, my opinions of the main characters have substantially improved. Both Gojo and Itadori have found a spot in my heart, and while I'm not entirely won over by Nobara and Megumi, in place of my previous disinterest, I now have a desire to pay closer attention to their characters. I still think it could be argued that the supporting cast is stronger, but these 4 aren't as mediocre as I once thought. With that said, I've now tackled the bulk of my previous criticisms, but I have a few other opinions that have evolved in some discernible way, and I would like to share those as well. I might have more to say on the characters in the future, but I'll leave it at that for now and move on to a few other topics.
Yes!
There's one opinion that has evolved from pure stubbornness to an understanding of what I didn't like, and that would be my feelings on the art style. Despite my love for artists like Yu Hiyashida and Fujimoto, it took longer for Gege's art to grow on me. For a while, I was put off by the art, and only recently have I been able to hone in on a specific criticism and separate it from my entire judgment. The art of Jujutsu Kaisen has a strong flavor, a mix of fiery passion and raw intensity. The line art has a sketchy quality without being messy at all. It appears frantic while still being deliberate. This is what Controlled Chaos looks like, and it's pretty sharp. To support that, the posing is dynamic and full of energy, leading to some stellar panels. The background art is as detailed as it needs to be, giving a good sense of space and setting the scene. The designs, which look unique, appropriately describe their characters. Gege particularly excels at drawing hands and never shies away from using them as the centerpiece of panels. I could look at them all day long and not get bored. In short, I can't complain too much. The art is unquestionably good, and I can no longer deny that. Yet what initially bothered me is still present in my current opinions. The character art can be quite ugly. Okay, I'm gonna let myself finish in just a minute, but this is exactly what I meant by this is a process for me. While looking through multiple volumes to find examples, I kinda realized how sparse these ugly panels are. I tried to find the best examples I could to fit how I felt at the time of writing the script, but as of right now, I'm starting to feel like this is more of a nitpick than anything else. So yeah, I guess I'm a clown for this take. Oh well. The faces occasionally have a fisheye appearance or a strange jawline that I'm not a fan of. At other times, it's a specific style of nose that looks hideous to me. Usually, the character art isn't a problem at all, and they look great. It's just a matter of inconsistency. Although, I've come to accept that, as much as I don't love how he draws faces, given the choice between consistently well-drawn faces and consistently expressive faces, I'm going to go for expression. Sure, it can be ugly, but I don't mind if it means the emotions of a scene can be heightened or the intensity of a fight is more visceral, which I would argue is exactly the case for Jujutsu Kaisen. Obviously, the art ties into the fight scenes, and yeah, I never had any major complaints. Even during my period of disinterest, I was aware the fights had some incredible flow of motion, powerful moments of impact, and choreography that was easy to follow. All that was true then, and it has only grown more true over time. During the breathing period in which dialogue is exchanged or powers are explained, the fights can get bogged down in details, but as far as the action goes, it never ceases to satisfy. I do find the power system and various abilities a little confusing because, unfortunately, it takes the whole shonen philosophy of let's explain, name, and categorize every power, move, and strategy to new heights. Or at least that's how I felt during my reading. Because there's so many rules and categories of moves, it's easy to forget the ins and outs of how cursed energy works, especially when you're more engaged in the combat and have no interest in the system itself. This is, in some ways, standard shonen fare, but Jujutsu Kaisen can be extremely wordy in its delivery of information. Once I look at an explanation video or read the wikia, it all seems so simple, but in the moment, there's a lot of moving parts to keep track of, terminologies that I inevitably forget over the course of 2 years. When an ability could have been explained as a more powerful punch, it hands me a textbook and I barely retain any of it. The anime helps alleviate this problem somewhat by demonstrating these abilities in animation, which is more practical for comprehending their functions, but I can still find myself forgetting their terms and what abilities fall into what categories. Cursed energy is on the more complicated side of battle shonen, maybe comparable to Hunter x Hunter or a step below JoJo's Bizarre bizarre adventure. That isn't a bad thing per se. I tend to enjoy power systems that are layered, but my experience with cursed energy was still riddled with minor confusion. At a certain point, I just went with the flow of action and trusted that it all made sense. I would like to have a better grasp on what's actually happening, but the execution of cursed energy techniques is perfectly fine in communicating the action even without the details. I don't think I need to understand the specifications of Black Flash, whether it's a curse technique, reverse curse technique, or a non-curse technique, to know that Itadori's punch hits really hard and why that's awesome. Although if I were to read from the beginning again, I would take the effort to understand this entire system because it probably would enrich the experience of these battles. The primary ability I do want to understand better is domain expansion because it seems like Jujutsu Kaisen's most unique addition to the battle formula. Beyond my inability to grasp what is happening when a domain is used, I get a little excited to see what type of ace in the hole it is.
Itadakimasu.
There's more to be discussed with Jujutsu Kaisen, but for as simple as they may have been, those were all of my biggest holdups with the series. With a majority of my previous criticisms covered, I think it's time to ask once more, why didn't I like Jujutsu Kaisen? In short, I was too caught up on what it wasn't that I didn't pay attention to what it was. A stylistically exciting battle shonen with fun characters and an engaging story. I thought it should be one thing, and when it wasn't that, I stopped caring until I was in the middle of a fantastic arc wondering where I got lost. I will concede, my premature lack of enthusiasm prevented me from paying as much attention as I should have. I developed opinions based on a surface level perception of the manga. It isn't that those opinions were invalid, as I've revealed that I still have some of those reservations, but they were the opinions of a person who didn't try to make an attempt to understand until recently. This is why I try to keep an open mind, why I'm okay with admitting that I might have been wrong, and why I allow my opinions to change. If I restrained my opinions to be what they were, I would have one less manga to be excited about. Jujutsu Kaisen will probably never be my favorite manga, nor do I suddenly love it as much as some of its fans, but I do finally like it, and that's all I could ask for.